This is my true story. I gave everything to my only son, my savings, my home, my years of work. I thought he would honor me, but instead he turned me into a joke in my own house. One night, he looked at me with hate and told me to eat with the dogs. That moment changed everything. The next day, the same old man he mocked appeared on television beside a lawyer, and the world watched as his pride was shattered. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. Dinner was supposed to be a quiet moment, just the two of us like old times. I had cooked the meal myself, the same way his mother used to. The table was set, the food warm, and I waited for him. When he finally came in, he looked at me like I was a stranger. He didn't sit, didn't smile, didn't even greet me. Instead, he pointed at the dogs sleeping near the kitchen and said coldly, "Eat with the dogs. That's where you belong." Then he walked away laughing, as if what he said was just a joke. But it wasn't. It was a knife through the chest. I stood there, holding the plate in my trembling hands, staring at the chair where he used to sit when he was little. I remembered the boy who once refused to eat unless I sat beside him. Now that same boy had grown into a man who thought I wasn't worth a seat at his table. My heart felt heavy, not from anger, but from disbelief. I had given him everything, my money, my time, my health, and in return, he gave me humiliation. The dogs lifted their heads, wagged their tails, waiting for me. So I took my plate and walked outside. The night air was cold, but it felt kinder than the warmth inside that house. I sat by the porch where the dogs ate. They gathered around me, licking my hands, their eyes full of trust and loyalty. I broke the bread in half and shared it with them. They didn't care who I was or what I had lost. They were just happy I was there. As I ate, I thought about the irony. I had built that house brick by brick so my son would never feel hunger or shame. Now I was the one sitting outside, sharing food with animals, because my own child couldn't share a meal with me. I didn't cry. The tears had dried years ago when I first realized my son only visited when he wanted money. But that night, something deeper broke inside me, the last piece of hope that he would ever change. The dogs lay beside me after we finished. One of them rested its head on my knee, as if trying to comfort me. I patted its fur slowly, feeling the warmth of something pure. It's strange how animals understand pain better than humans sometimes. I sat there until the moon rose high, thinking of all the times I had forgiven my son's arrogance, his cold words, his disrespect. But this was different. This was the night I stopped being a father and started being a man again, one who refused to be treated like dirt. When I finally went back inside, the lights were off. He was gone, probably out with his friends, spending the money I had earned. The dining table still had his untouched food, and beside it, his glass of wine half full. I poured it down the sink, cleaned the dishes, and went to bed. But sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice. "Eat with the dogs." It echoed in my head like a curse, reminding me that love can die quietly when pride takes its place. That night, lying awake, I made a silent promise to myself. I would no longer beg for respect from someone who didn't know its meaning. I would no longer stay silent while he walked over the years I sacrificed for him. He thought I was weak, that I would just accept it and move on. But he had forgotten something. I built his entire world, and I could take it back. As the first light of morning crept through the window, I looked around the house, my house, and realized it was time to remind him who made him who he is. I may have eaten with the dogs that night, but the next time he saw me, he wouldn't be able to look me in the eye without seeing what he'd lost. The next morning, the house was still. The kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It brings weight. I sat at the same table where the insult had been spoken, staring at the empty chair across from me. His plate was gone, but the memory of his words stayed. I made my tea slowly, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the dogs moving outside. That sound was the only sign of life left in that house. My son didn't come downstairs. He had left early for work, or maybe just didn't want to face me. Either way, I didn't care. Something had died the night before, and I knew it wasn't just my pride. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call friends, didn't complain to neighbors. There was nothing to explain that could make sense. How do you tell people that your own child, the one you raised alone after his mother passed, told you to eat with the dogs? They'd either pity me or pretend to understand, and I didn't want either. So, I stayed quiet. I washed the dishes, cleaned the table, and fed the dogs again. They looked at me with those same loyal eyes, waiting for a smile. I gave them one, small and tired. They didn't need words to understand pain. The silence in the house stretched into the afternoon. I could hear the clock ticking louder than usual. Every tick felt like a reminder of birthdays I spent alone, of nights waiting for him to come home safe, of all the times I gave him my share of food when money was tight. The silence was heavy because it carried all the noise from the past, the laughter that used to fill these rooms, the echoes of a family that no longer existed. I realized then that this wasn't a home anymore. It was just a house built on the ashes of gratitude. When he came back that evening, he didn't speak to me. He walked past me as if I was part of the furniture. His shoes left dirt on the floor, his cologne filled the air, and his voice spoke only to someone on the phone, laughing, joking, living a life where I didn't exist. I watched from the corner of my eye as he grabbed his dinner, ate quickly, and went upstairs. He didn't even look at me. Not once. That was the moment I stopped being invisible and became indifferent. It's one thing to be unseen. It's another to stop caring if you ever are. Later that night, I heard him arguing with someone over the phone about money, something about a car loan, a party, and payments he couldn't cover. I lay on my bed listening, thinking of how many times I had saved him before, how many times I emptied my pockets just to see him smile again. I realized now that all I'd done was teach him that love means never facing consequences. That was my mistake. I raised him to believe forgiveness was endless. But forgiveness has a cost. And I had paid enough. When the noise upstairs stopped, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark. My mind was quiet, but not calm. I wasn't angry. Anger is sharp and burns fast. This was colder, deeper. It was the silence of someone who has accepted that love can turn into humiliation if you let it. I thought about the future, about what would happen when I was gone. Everything I owned, everything I built, would be his by law. And that thought filled me with disgust. The man who couldn't offer his father a seat at the table didn't deserve the roof above it. That night, I made a decision. I didn't shout. I didn't plan revenge out of rage. I planned justice out of peace, the kind of peace that comes after pain. I looked around the house one last time, the pictures on the wall, the furniture I bought with my first bonus, the garden his mother loved. And I realized something simple. It was all wasted on someone who valued nothing but himself. When the morning came, I packed a small bag. My heart was steady. I had one goal, one truth, one final act to make things right. I would not die in a house where I had been told to eat with the dogs. I would leave behind something far more powerful than money, a lesson he would never forget. That night was long and cold. The walls of that house felt tighter, as if they knew what had been said inside them. I sat in the dark, no lights on, just the ticking clock echoing through the empty rooms. My son's laughter still lingered faintly in the air from earlier, the sound of a man who had no respect left for the one who gave him everything. I sat there staring at the cold remains of dinner, the untouched chair across the table, and I wondered when exactly love had turned into humiliation. It wasn't sudden. It had been building for years, one careless word at a time, until finally, last night, it broke completely. I looked around the living room. Every piece of furniture had a memory. The couch where he used to fall asleep after school. The framed photo from his graduation, the one I paid for after selling my old truck. The house had been built with my hands and my hope. But as I sat there, I realized it no longer felt like home. It had become a museum of sacrifices no one cared to remember. The silence was louder than anything I had ever heard. The dogs lay near my feet, breathing softly. They were the only ones who stayed close. I reached down and patted one of them. Their presence kept me from breaking completely. They didn't know betrayal. They didn't understand pride. They only understood loyalty, the kind that doesn't fade with time or success. I felt more human sitting with them than I had in years sitting with my own son. The hours crawled. I didn't sleep. I replayed everything in my mind. The nights I stayed awake when he was sick. The jobs I took just to pay for his education. The meals I skipped so he could eat more. Every memory felt like a wound reopening. I thought about his mother, how proud she was of him before she passed. She had said he'd make me proud one day. I wondered what she would think now. Maybe it was better she never saw this day. Around midnight, I walked to the backyard. The moonlight fell over the garden I planted for my wife. The flowers had grown wild, untended, but still alive. A reminder that life goes on even when no one cares for it. I stood there, feeling the night air, thinking about how I ended up here. A father unwanted in his own home. My hands shook, not from age, but from the weight of disappointment. I whispered to myself, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. I had done everything a father should. Maybe I did too much. Maybe I gave so much that he never had to earn respect or gratitude. Maybe love without limits teaches a child that kindness is weakness. And now, here I was, weak in his eyes, invisible, disposable. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me colder. I went back inside, sat in my chair, and looked at the family portrait on the wall. My son's smile in that photo was bright, innocent. I wondered when that light turned into greed. The boy who once said, "I'll take care of you when you're old," was gone. In his place stood a man who told me to eat with dogs. I understood something in that moment. Family can be blood, but it can also be poison. The night passed without rest. My mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. I knew exactly what I had to do. The house, the company, the savings. They were not rewards for cruelty. They were meant for someone who understood value. I decided right there, before dawn, that I would take everything he assumed was his and turn it into something good, something that would outlive his arrogance. When the first light broke through the curtains, I rose slowly, steady on my feet. I wasn't the broken father he thought he'd left at the table. I was a man with purpose again. And that purpose was simple: to make sure that when he remembered me, he remembered what he lost. Not because of fate, but because of his own pride. That was the night my pain turned into power. The night I stopped begging for love and started planning for justice. When the morning came, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window. The world outside looked peaceful. Birds singing, sun rising, everything normal. But inside me, something had changed forever. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a man remembering every scar love had left behind. The bitterness from last night still hung in the air. Every corner of that house carried a memory, and each one hurt differently. I remembered the first day we moved into this house. It was just me, my wife, and a small boy holding my hand. He was afraid of the big rooms, so I carried him from corner to corner and told him, "This is your home." I worked 2 jobs back then, came home late, tired, but seeing him smile made it worth it. I gave him everything I never had: comfort, security, love. I thought that would be enough to teach him gratitude. I was wrong. I thought about the days when he was sick, lying in bed with fever. I stayed awake all night, changing wet towels on his forehead, whispering stories until he slept. I didn't even rest for a minute. I remembered when he won his first prize at school. I was prouder that day than I'd ever been of myself. That boy, that bright little soul who used to call me his hero, had grown into a man who saw me as nothing. The more I remembered, the heavier my heart became. Each memory felt like salt on a wound. I saw flashes of the birthdays I planned, the shoes I polished for him before school, the lunchboxes I packed when his mother passed away. I did everything alone after she died: the cooking, the cleaning, the late nights when he cried for her. I never let him feel her absence. I gave up my own grief so he could have a normal childhood. And now, after all those years, all those sacrifices, he told me to eat with the dogs. I tried to understand where I went wrong. Did I love him too much? Did I make life too easy for him? Maybe I should have let him struggle, let him learn what hunger and hard work feel like. Instead, I built him a world where he never had to lift a finger. I thought love was about giving everything. I realize now love also needs respect, and respect cannot be bought with comfort. I remembered one particular moment, his wedding day. I stood in front of the crowd, tears in my eyes, giving a speech about how proud I was of him. I told everyone he was a good man, a kind man. But behind that smile, he was already changing. His new wife never liked me much. She saw me as a burden, something that reminded her of the past she didn't come from. Slowly, she built a wall between us. And my son let her. He let her make me small in my own home. As I sat there lost in thought, I realized that the boy I raised died long ago. The man who stood before me now was someone else. Cold, arrogant, blind to everything that mattered. It hurt to admit, but the son I loved no longer existed. All that remained was his shadow, living in a house filled with my memories, but none of my worth. I looked at the old photo on the wall, him sitting on my shoulders when he was 5. His small hands wrapped around my head, both of us laughing. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "Where did you go, my boy?" There was no answer, only the quiet hum of the morning. That's when I knew what I had to do. Memories couldn't save me anymore. They could only remind me of the pain. The past was gone, and the future needed to be rewritten. Not for revenge, but for dignity. I wasn't going to let him bury me with disrespect. I had given him life. Now I would take back everything else. That memory of love, sacrifice, and betrayal became the fire that fueled what came next. The day he told me to eat with the dogs was the day I decided to teach him what happens when a father stops forgiving. The truth hit me one morning like cold water. I was sitting at the same kitchen table, watching the sunlight spill through the curtains, and I realized something simple but painful. Love doesn't always last, but respect should. My son had taken both and thrown them away. I had spent years believing that my sacrifices built his success, but all I really built was his arrogance. Every time I said, "It's okay," I gave him permission to forget who made his world possible. That morning, I stopped saying it's okay. I looked around my house, every wall, every photo, every chair. All of it carried my fingerprints. I built this home from scratch after his mother died. I worked through nights with no sleep, carried bricks myself when I couldn't afford help, and still smiled when he called me old-fashioned. I had created something from nothing, and now I was treated like nothing inside it. That realization burned deeper than any insult. I wasn't living in my home anymore. I was surviving inside his comfort. I understood then that kindness can turn into weakness when given to the wrong people. My son didn't become cruel overnight. He learned slowly. Every time I forgave him for disrespect, every time I let his words slide because I loved him too much to argue. I had mistaken silence for peace, but silence only taught him that my love would never fight back. That was my failure as a father, not loving too little, but loving without boundaries. That morning, I went into my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept the property papers. My hands trembled, not from age, but from decision. I stared at my name written there, bold and clear. The owner of everything he thought was his. The cars he drove, the land he bragged about, the business he used to impress his friends, all of it came from me. It was then I realized how easy it would be to take it all back. Not out of revenge, but justice. He had turned my generosity into his entitlement. That had to end. I thought about every time he mocked me in front of others, every time he sighed when I asked for help, every time he looked away when I needed company. Those weren't small moments. They were signs that I ignored because I wanted to believe love could fix everything. But love without respect is just pain in disguise. I had been blind for too long. The man sitting in my house was not the son I raised. He was a stranger wearing my bloodline. As I stood there, holding those papers, I remembered something my father once said before he died. "You can give a man money, but you can't give him heart." I finally understood what he meant. My son had everything money could buy, but nothing that love should build. No gratitude, no humility, no conscience. And that was my fault. I had raised him in comfort, but never in consequence. I sat down on the bed and decided that I wouldn't cry anymore. Tears wouldn't change anything. I was done being the quiet victim in my own story. The realization wasn't just painful. It was freeing. For the first time in years, I felt in control again. I knew what had to be done. Not just to teach him a lesson, but to give myself peace. I deserved that much. As I put the papers back, I whispered to myself, no more begging for respect. The man who walked out of that room wasn't a broken father anymore. He was someone who finally saw the truth, that sometimes, to save your dignity, you must let go of your own blood. That was the morning I stopped being afraid of losing my son, because I realized he was already gone. That morning, when the realization had settled deep inside me like stone, I made my decision. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't out of anger. It came from a quiet, cold place where pain finally turns into purpose. I sat at the table with a pen in my hand and a calmness I hadn't felt in years. The same hand that once wrote checks for my son's dreams was now about to write something that would end his comfort forever. I decided that everything I had built, the house, the land, the business, the savings, would no longer belong to him. It was time to give my life's work to those who actually respected what hard work meant. I had spent decades believing blood was the only bond that mattered, but I learned that blood without love is just a curse. My son had become proof of that. I didn't want revenge. I wanted closure. I wanted him to understand that his cruelty had consequences that no apology could undo. I went to my old wooden cabinet and pulled out all the documents. The deeds, the company papers, the bank passbooks, everything that carried my name. I laid them out neatly on the table. My son's arrogance had blinded him to one truth. I was still the man who owned everything. He thought my silence was weakness, but it was patience. And patience, when it ends, becomes power. By the afternoon, I was sitting in my lawyer's office. He had known me for years, helped me build my company from the ground up. He looked at me with concern when I walked in unannounced. I told him everything, not in anger, but in clarity. I explained how my son had forgotten the meaning of respect, how I had raised a man who valued money more than people, status more than family. The lawyer listened quietly. Then I told him what I wanted done. Transfer everything. All my property, all my business shares, every account, away from my son. He asked, "To whom?" I told him, "To those who stayed when my own blood left. The employees who worked with me for 30 years, the caretaker who brought me food when I was sick, the foundation that helped me when I lost everything once before. They would inherit everything, not because they asked for it, but because they earned it with their loyalty." As I signed the papers, my hand didn't shake. Each signature felt like a breath of freedom. For the first time in decades, I wasn't a father trying to hold a family together. I was a man reclaiming his dignity. Every stroke of the pen erased a memory of humiliation. Every signature replaced pain with peace. My lawyer looked at me when I was done and said softly, "Are you sure?" I nodded. I had never been more sure of anything in my life. When I left his office, the sun was setting. The air felt lighter. I walked down the street slowly, feeling like I had finally let go of the chains that tied me to disappointment. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades. What stayed was something quieter: justice. My son had thought he could humiliate me and walk away unchanged. Now, he would live to learn that respect is the only inheritance worth earning. That night, as I sat by the window watching the lights of the city flicker, I thought of the boy he once was, the little boy who used to run to me with open arms. I wished I could have saved that child from the man he became. But life doesn't give second chances for love taken for granted. I realized I wasn't punishing him. I was simply ending the story where it should have ended years ago. The decision didn't make me happy, but it made me free. I could finally sleep without bitterness. My conscience was clear. I had done what needed to be done, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one who had to prove his worth. The next move was his, and I already knew, when the truth reached him, he would finally feel what I felt that night: silence, regret, and the weight of his own choices. After I made the decision, I knew I had to prepare everything carefully, not just for legal reasons, but for peace of mind. I wanted no loopholes, no room for arguments, no way for my son to twist things once I was gone. This wasn't an act of revenge anymore. It was about closing my story with dignity. I wanted every document signed, every signature witnessed, every detail recorded. When people betray you once, you learn never to leave loose ends again. The first thing I did was call my lawyer and schedule a final review of the documents. I told him to make copies of everything, one for the court, one for me, and one to be held in the vault. I also told him to record a video statement for public release after everything was finalized. He hesitated, asked if I was sure. I told him yes. I needed the world to hear my truth. I didn't want my son twisting the story, playing the victim after what he'd done. This time, I would speak first and last. Over the next few days, I gathered every paper related to my assets: property deeds, business registration, bank statements, insurance, even the old letters from government offices. I organized them neatly, labeled every file, and left clear instructions for my lawyer. It wasn't easy doing it alone, but I felt lighter with every folder I sealed. Each one felt like a piece of my old pain finally being put to rest. Then I began preparing for what would come next: the announcement. I knew my son wouldn't care until it hit him publicly. He needed to see my face on the television, calm and confident, while his world fell apart. Not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because that was the only way he'd ever understand what it feels like to be powerless. The same powerlessness he made me feel the night he told me to eat with the dogs. The lawyer contacted a local news station that had covered my company before. They agreed to record a short interview. A businessman gives away his fortune to charity. They thought it was an inspiring story. I smiled. They had no idea the pain behind it. We scheduled the shoot for Friday morning. I ironed my best shirt that night, the same one I wore on the day I founded my company. I wanted to look like the man I used to be: strong, proud, unbroken. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the window with a glass of water, thinking about everything that led me here. 30 years of work, 30 years of love, all ending in a single announcement. I felt sadness, yes, but no regret. Sometimes peace is born in destruction. I had built everything with love, and now I was taking it back with clarity. That balance felt fair. Before sunrise, I walked through the house one last time. I touched the walls, the furniture, the memories. I stood in front of my son's childhood room. Still had his old trophies, his posters, the marks on the wall where I used to measure his height. I smiled faintly. The little boy who once said, "I want to be like you, Dad," was long gone. What remained was a stranger who thought kindness was weakness. But I wasn't weak anymore. When morning came, I got ready. I wore that same shirt, combed my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a tired old man, yes, but one who finally remembered his worth. I left the house quietly and took a cab to the studio. The air outside felt cold, but it also felt clean. I knew after that day, nothing would ever be the same, and I was fine with that. By the time I reached the studio, my lawyer was already there. Cameras were being set up, reporters were preparing their notes. He handed me a paper, the official statement transferring everything to charity. I signed it in front of them all, my name, my signature, my freedom, and when they asked me why I did it, I just said, because respect is worth more than inheritance. The cameras captured it all. That was the moment my silence ended. The day of the broadcast felt heavier than any I had lived before. I sat in front of the cameras under bright lights, and for the first time in years, I wasn't nervous. My hands rested steady on the table. My lawyer sat beside me, ready with the papers. The reporters adjusted their mics, and one of them said softly, "We're live." The red light blinked on, and my story began. I looked straight into the camera, not as a businessman, not as a father, but as a man finally taking back his dignity. I started by thanking everyone who had supported me through my years of work. The people who stood by me, not because they needed something, but because they believed in me. Then, without emotion, I told them the truth. I said that family doesn't always mean love, that sometimes the people who share your name will use it to take everything you've earned. The room went silent. The cameras zoomed in closer. I could feel the weight of every word filling the air. Then I said the words that would make headlines. As of today, I have signed every right to my properties, businesses, and accounts over to the people who stayed loyal, my workers, my caretakers, and the charities that actually care for the old and forgotten. The lawyer slid the documents across the table and confirmed the signatures. It was legal. Final. There would be no going back. My voice didn't shake once. I was calm, not because I felt joy, but because I felt finished. When the cameras cut, the reporters surrounded me with questions. Why, how, who? I didn't answer most of them. I just said, some lessons need to be learned the hard way. Then I stood up, thanked the crew, and walked out of the studio. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew that by now, every TV in my city was showing my face. Every headline was printing my name beside the words, "Donated everything." At that same moment, my son was probably sitting at home, watching me, maybe laughing at first, thinking it was a joke, maybe thinking he'd still inherit something later. But then the truth would sink in. The father he told to eat with dogs had taken back every bone of comfort he ever had. And he couldn't undo it. Not this time. The lawyer made sure of that. My voice echoed through every screen, every speaker, telling the world what respect truly meant. When I reached home later that evening, my phone was already vibrating nonstop. Calls from numbers I recognized, and some I didn't. My son had called 15 times, no message, just missed calls. I didn't answer. Let him feel what I felt those nights he ignored me at the dinner table. Let silence speak the truth he never cared to hear. The more it rang, the calmer I felt. Revenge wasn't needed anymore. Justice had already spoken. The news played through the neighborhood that night. Neighbors looked at me differently, some in surprise, some in admiration. I wasn't proud. Pride was for men who still cared about appearances. What I felt was something deeper. Freedom. For the first time, I could breathe without carrying the weight of betrayal. I had no money now, but I had peace. And peace, I realized, is worth more than wealth guarded by ungrateful hands. That night, I sat on the porch again, the same spot where I had once eaten with the dogs. They came close, resting their heads on my legs. I fed them a little bread, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You're the only ones who never forgot kindness." The stars looked brighter that night. I didn't know if it was because of relief or exhaustion, but for the first time, I didn't feel small. The world finally knew my truth, and my son finally had to live with his. Inside, the TV was still running, replaying clips of the broadcast. My face appeared on the screen again, older, worn, but proud. The news anchor repeated my words. Family is not who inherits your wealth. It's who never lets you eat alone. I turned off the TV, leaned back, and closed my eyes. For the first time in decades, I felt like my story was truly mine again. When the broadcast ended, silence filled my house, but the world outside exploded. My name was everywhere. My phone buzzed, messages poured in, and the same people who once ignored me suddenly wanted to talk. But among all the calls, one name stood out, my son. He called again and again, 20, 30 times. No words left in voicemails, just silence. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he couldn't believe what he'd seen. For once, the man who always had something cruel to say had no words left. That night, I didn't pick up. I wanted him to feel what real silence felt like. The kind that sits heavy in your chest and doesn't let you breathe. I wanted him to remember the silence of the night he told me to eat with the dogs, the silence that followed my humiliation. I wanted him to taste it now, not from hate, but from justice. Some lessons can't be taught with lectures. They need silence and consequence. By morning, the news spread everywhere. The neighbors whispered, the newspapers printed my photo, and the television kept replaying my words. I saw my son's name trending online. "Ungrateful heir loses everything," the headlines read. The same people he tried to impress were now laughing behind his back. The same friends who drank at his table were deleting his number. The power, the pride, the arrogance, all gone in a single night. He came to my house that afternoon. I heard the car door slam, the heavy steps, the desperate knocks. "Dad, open the door!" he shouted again and again. But I didn't move. The dogs barked at the noise, circling him from the other side of the gate. He shouted louder, hitting the gate with his fists, calling me every name he could remember, some angry, some pleading. I stood inside, staring through the window, watching the same son who once made me feel small now begging for mercy. He stayed there for hours, sometimes pacing, sometimes sitting on the porch, waiting for me to open the door. I didn't. Not because I enjoyed his pain, but because I knew that if I opened that door, nothing would change. He'd apologize now, yes, but not out of love, out of loss. I had learned the hard way that regret born from losing comfort is not the same as remorse born from love. And I wanted him to learn that too. Later that evening, when the sun began to set, he finally left. But before he did, he looked back one last time, not in anger, but in defeat. His shoulders dropped, his pride gone. The man who once thought I was beneath him finally realized who made his world possible. It took losing everything for him to understand what family really meant. That night, I received a message on my phone. It was from him. Just 4 words. "I'm sorry, Dad. Please." I stared at it for a long time. My heart ached, but my mind stayed clear. Some doors, once shut, should stay closed. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because some apologies come too late. When love has been crushed too many times, even forgiveness loses its strength. The next day, people came to interview me again. They wanted to know what I felt: proud, angry, happy. I told them none of those fit. I said I just felt free. Free from the weight of waiting for respect that never came. Free from pretending that blood automatically means love. Free from being the man who begged for a seat at his own table. The reporters were quiet. They didn't know how to respond. That night, I sat outside with the dogs again. They ate quietly beside me, loyal as ever. I thought about my son, where he might be, what he might be thinking. I didn't hate him. Hate requires energy, and I was too tired for that. What I felt was sorrow. Deep, quiet sorrow for the man he could have been if he had just chosen kindness over pride. But now, all he had left was silence, and all I had left was peace. The justice didn't come from the court or from anyone's apology. It came in silence, in time, and in truth. Days passed after the broadcast, and slowly, I began to see how everything balanced itself. People who had once turned their faces away from me now greeted me with respect. They no longer saw an old, weak man. They saw someone who stood for his own dignity. But more than that, they saw a warning. Never forget the hands that fed you. That was justice enough for me. My son tried many times to reach me after that. Calls, letters, people knocking on my door on his behalf. He even came one night, waited outside in the cold, sitting on the same porch where I had once eaten with the dogs. But I didn't open the door. I looked through the window quietly, remembering all the nights I sat alone in that same cold, hungry, and humiliated. Sometimes life returns every wound you've given, not to destroy you, but to teach you. That was his lesson to learn now. A month later, my lawyer called. The charity work had started. The employees I had trusted were building homes for poor families using the funds I donated. The company name still existed, but it no longer belonged to my blood. It belonged to my beliefs. That, to me, was justice too. My legacy wasn't gone. It had just changed owners. No longer in the hands of greed, but in the hearts of those who needed it. I slept easier that night. For the first time in years, I dreamed without pain. People started writing letters to me, some thanking me, others sharing their own stories of betrayal. Old parents who were thrown aside by their children, Men who were called useless after retirement. Women forgotten by their own families. They said my story gave them courage to speak up. I never wanted fame. I only wanted peace. But if my pain became their voice, then maybe my suffering meant something after all. As for my son, I heard from neighbors that he moved out of town, lost his friends, sold his car, tried to rebuild his life. Some said he started working small jobs again. I didn't ask where. I didn't care to know. Life had already given him what I never could, a mirror. A mirror that showed him who he truly was when the money was gone, when respect could no longer be bought. That mirror was his punishment and his only chance at redemption. Every Friday, I still sit on the same porch. The dogs come and sit beside me. They're older now, like me, slower but loyal as ever. I feed them a little, stroke their fur, and watch the sky darken. I think about everything that happened, and I realize justice isn't about revenge. It's about balance. When you stop chasing fairness, it finds you. It comes quietly, like peace after a storm, and it stays longer than anger ever could. Sometimes, I wonder if he'll ever come back again. If he does, I might open the door this time. Not to give him anything, but to look him in the eyes and ask, "Did you learn?" That's all I'd need to know, because forgiveness without understanding is useless, but remorse with growth, that's justice too. The house feels quieter now, but it's a peaceful quiet, not a lonely one. I no longer wait for footsteps or laughter. I have my own company, my thoughts, my dogs, the ocean breeze through the porch. Everything feels lighter. The weight of betrayal has been replaced by the calm of closure. And sometimes, when the news reruns my story again, I watch it for a moment and smile faintly. Not because I'm proud, but because I finally see myself the way I wish my son had seen me. A man who gave everything, lost everything, and still stood tall. That, I think, is justice. The world took away my comfort, but gave me back my self-respect. And that's a trade I'd take every time.